Thanks so much for joining. So I'm John Surico. I am a journalist who writes about our changing streetscape and transportation and infrastructure. So it's been quite a busy 2 years for me, let alone this past month with everything that's going on in Washington. And I also teach cities-focused journalism at New York University. I recently wrote a story in Bloomberg City Lab about the downtown Brooklyn Public Action Realm Plan, which is what we're here to talk about. And it's something that, kind of was first envisioned in 2019, but I think has really taken a kind of pandemic era glean and a kind of new significance, I think, in these recent months. So I'm going to quickly go to some panelist biographies and then we'll kind of get into it. So first, who needs no introduction, Regina Myer, president of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, previously president of the Brooklyn Bridge Park, the kind of 85 acres that has become such a destination. I was there this weekend, amazingly packed for a 35-degree night, which was awesome. And before that, Hudson Yards planning department, with the city getting, really involved with some of the most crucial projects, redevelopment of the Greenpoint, Williamsburg waterfront, and also with the rezoning of downtown Brooklyn. Next, we have Claire Weisz, founding principal of WXY Studio. I get to see WXY's work every day because I'm currently at Cooper Square on Astor Place. So I get to see the great work here. It's one of my favorite plazas downtown now. And also the sanitation salt shed, a true Architecture Wong's favorite building. I love that building. And then the Rockaway Boardwalks, great work with WXY. And then finally, we have Kate Cella, landscape architect at Bjarke Ingels Group. Bjarke Ingels behind some of the most visionary work, I would say, coming up in landscape architecture in the city. Notably, the spiral going up at Hudson Yards, the Big U, which really inspired the work that's going to happen on the East River. And then a project I'm really excited to see, the River Ring that's happening just north of Domino Park. So just a quick run of show. We're going to see a brief overview of the project of the Public Action Realm Plan. And then I'm going to kind of jump into questions. We'll have about 10 minutes or so at the end for Q&A from the audience. So I will punt it to Regina for a quick overview of the Public Action Realm Plan that's kind of emerging in downtown Brooklyn.
Thank you so much. And thanks again to everyone who's participating and to NYC by Design. We're so happy to be talking about downtown Brooklyn within the context of citywide design issues. The Downtown Brooklyn Public Realm Plan came from the idea that after so many years, after nearly 20 years of redevelopment of downtown Brooklyn post the rezoning in 2004, it was really time to look at some of the hard issues street by street that have been illuminated after development. And what do I mean by that? I know that we know that the city worked really hard in the 2000s on making sure that the overall appearance along our major arteries look great, Flatbush Avenue, Adams, Tillery, Atlantic. But really what seemed to be missing, and we've really realized this in the past few years, that once the construction fences go down, we realized that the pedestrian environment throughout the core had simply been ignored. And by retaining BIG and WXY, we had this incredible opportunity to look at these really important streets that people had honestly thought were not important. And what we realized is that the success of downtown Brooklyn is really contingent on us upgrading block by block conditions. And so the goals of our effort are to use current tools to upgrade the core of downtown Brooklyn. So we are focusing on shared streets and improved pedestrian conditions on nearly every block. We're looking at making sure that when infrastructure goes into our streets and to our vehicular and bicycle network, that there's a benefit for everybody. We know how important greening of our city is. We need to take that down to the block by block perspective of downtown Brooklyn, increased biodiversity. And then also, I think the other thing we need to improve, to keep our Brooklyn identity. We didn't want our aesthetic to look like the aesthetic of the rest of New York City, and really focused on ways that we can differentiate our neighborhood, really as a not just as a term of pride, but also as a way to really continue to communicate that downtown Brooklyn is a very special location. And so the next slide here really at a high level, and we'll get into details in the Q&A, shows that our focus is on making sure that we have a specific downtown Brooklyn standard that can be rolled out block by block that makes a difference to everyone. That a shared street network get implemented that really adds meaningful pedestrian space. That we look hard at the bus and bike network that have been so vestigial to old patterns of both our bus network and our traditional north-south thinking of getting onto the bridge. We need to crack out of that code. And then finally, we need to look at our parks. There's actually some incredible Parks Department real estate in downtown Brooklyn that hasn't been looked at as a way to think about downtown Brooklyn as a mixed-use community, and we really need to. So really that's what our overall project is about. And I'm really thrilled that we're here this morning, this almost noon, to talk about what those details are with the design team.
And then briefly, before I go into questions, Claire and Kate, I would love to just kind of quickly just add your role on the project. So I guess we'll start with Claire.
I'm going to rely on Regina to cover that. Regina hired two firms, Big and WXY, to collaborate. And I think it was really interesting for both firms because, again, even though both are multidisciplinary firms, Big's located in Brooklyn, WXY is in Lower Manhattan, but we having done Brooklyn Tech Triangle and especially with Regina, Brooklyn Strand, I think it was fantastic to have Big as kind of a new voice in the mix. And, it was a multi-year process. I mean, we worked together for 2 years.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been really extraordinary about this experience is that since so much is happening in downtown Brooklyn, we're able to not just come up with a street by street plan, but we're starting to work so closely with DOT on implementation. And having both firms honestly think about that was an incredible opportunity for the partnership. I mean, our role is as a business improvement district is to advocate, but having this kind of design work really has been permitting us to move into the implementation mode and really influence what the streetscape looks like. So that's I'm so proud that we have worked with both firms, because I think that honestly having both gave us both the energy and the muscle to accomplish a lot more.
Great. So actually, that's a perfect segue to the first kind of question. So I'm going to talk a bit broadly, and then we'll get into the kind of plan specifics itself. Regina, this kind of came up when I remember when we first talked about the plan, and it's really this shift that I think is really fascinating with bids and business groups the last couple of years, where previously with Streetscape, bids were always a bit hesitant losing parking. We're always a bit hesitant with kind of major changes. The car was always kind of the focus, car access. And I think that's really changed. And I think specifically in New York City, we really see bids now leading the way. I mean, we have, Flatiron, Meatpacking District, Soho Broadway Alliance that just said pedestrianize most of Soho. Downtown Brooklyn, I think, is the most ambitious in scope and size, which I think was, really kind of gripped me about the plan. But, just kind of this shift that we've seen from bids. I would love to hear a bit about that shift that you've kind of seen, and also why you think a plan like this is necessary for an area like downtown Brooklyn right now.
Yeah, I think the reason why a lot of work is coming out of business improvement districts now is that no one knows neighborhoods as well as people on the micro level. And when you're working at an agency, and of course, our partners at DOT and Parks have been phenomenal. Honestly, their attention is pushed and pulled so many different ways. And what the partnership with the business improvements gives projects, and really any of them, is that the neighborhood know-how that helps really inform and make the projects richer. And that's to me why there is the huge moment on the bid part. You know, when I look at amazing examples like Union Square or Flatiron or Astor, as you mentioned, those are site-by-site locations that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't on the ground local advocacy. And so to me, that's really been part and parcel with this, is that we're a partner.
Yeah, and I think this is something that, Claire, I would love to hear your quick kind of opinion on this. Just changing the toolbox of what's possible in the city, right? As the city has their kind of standardized toolbox, which we're rapidly seeing changing. I mean, if you try to get a sidewalk cafe permit 3 years ago versus what happened now with the open restaurants, this toolbox is changing quite rapidly what the city can do. But, really kind of changing that toolbox of what's possible. I would love to hear a bit about, how this project and other kind of projects like it can really push the city a bit.
Well, I think just to build on what Regina was talking about, there's an interesting thing in New York City, which I think is unlike other places, where there's basically unique situations. You need a plan, like the plan that WXY and Big have been working on for how the whole thing comes together. And even better, I think those plans, and downtown Brooklyn is a really large area, okay? Like that's even more so than any of the areas you talked about. It's much, much bigger, and it's much more diverse, and it's got way more grids. So, but there's this other phenomenon that comes out of DOT, which is they established design standards. And that was actually a new thing for DOT, that is to establish a toolkit or palette that people can use in different ways. But those tend to be, after a long time, kind of limited, right? They have limitations. And so really part of I think the kind of innovative part of this is to push that toolkit. And I think Kate will talk more about trees. I'll talk a little bit more about the curb and stuff, but it's like you have curbs, you have tree pits, you have lighting, you have materials that you pour concrete out of, you have seating, and you have trash bins or planters. That's pretty much the palette you have. Now the question is, how does that allow you to do a lot of things in places, even if, let's say, the park plan that you're working on, the larger target park, might take longer, but really a toolkit you can implement much faster.
I'm glad you mentioned the curb, because it's something that I was thinking of, this kind of bulbous curb that's kind of emerging on Hoyt Street. You can kind of get a sense of what it looks like right off there on the subway stop. And this kind of new design of what our curbs can look like and what our kind of street trees and tree pits can look like, which is a, great segue. Yeah, exactly. The kind of the paving, the kind of planters is really unique. I would say, for everyone interested, to, take a peek at what's going on going into Hoyt. It looks way different than the average New York City sidewalk.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
You can see Elm Street now. They've poured the curb, and that's even wider and more bulbous.
Yeah,
we were able to do that.
So, Kate, actually,
I mean,
yeah.
Right, go ahead. So, I mean, that's sort of the key principle, right? This is great to see these pictures, and Kate will talk more about it. Is how do you realign how people use curbs, but also, we have a lot of trees and planting that is really constrained. How do you increase the amount of permeable surface and planting without impeding the amount of room pedestrians have? And that does mean reshaping the curb. So one of the core ideas that was the initial part of the plan was to create a greener, softer, and more pedestrian and bike oriented, which basically means pushing out the sidewalk and creating this new geometry. And I think this distinctive geometry is really about slowing down cars and allowing more space for pedestrians and bikes. So, you know, you saw DOT started this with their chicane, you know, that pattern that kind of did this. And I think what we all did is we softened that and created a geometry out of that and extended that into, I call the aviator idea, which really takes something that DOT and parks already allowed, which is circular pits, and connecting them together.
Yeah. I mean, we should hear from Kate, though, to talk about the experience at Tishman explicitly, because I think for our audience to understand how we got to implementation so quickly would really give another perspective.
Yes, we went through PDC approval last summer, and it took quite a long time. We had a lot of very big ideas going in, different design aspects and different design ideas. And I think PDC rightly gave us some pretty stern feedback that, you know, we were sort of weren't fitting into any of their guidelines in any way with some of our proposals. So what really started to develop over the course of 2 months to get this approved was really using the standard toolkit in a different way, and having this curvilinear line and this curvilinear geometry to really differentiate what is increased pedestrian space and increased planting and increased stormwater capture, and to highlight that in a downtown that's really right now very geometrically sharp corners, the buildings, the sidewalks, everything. So it was really trying to soften it and create a new design language to highlight sort of these improvements in terms of infrastructure and increasing the public experience. So it was not a particularly easy process. However, we learned a tremendous amount. And I think we ended up on something that really, in a lot, viewing it long-term, is really a pretty smart design, because it just takes that standard sidewalk. So if anything gets torn up, it's easily replaced in the future for utility purposes or whatnot. And then the permeable paving is really what's making this curvilinear geometry, which is easy to remove and replace. So they really sort of pushed us in a direction that I think ultimately is very implementable across the district.
Yeah, Kate, I think you touched upon, you know, a couple points that I think are so important here. Specifically, our streets are going to have to do a lot more, right, in the coming years. You know, we've really learned that after Ida. I mean, we've known that for years, but Ida really reminded us. And this plan would have up to 1,000, you know, add up to 1,000 new street trees. I'm a huge lover of street trees. I advocate for them in my own personal time. I think, you know, we really see this with kind of new kind of demands, new reports coming out. Our streets are really going to have to change. And I think this is a good example of how do we squeeze in green space when we can, because we know the streets are going to have to be as permeable as possible.
Yeah, and I would just add quickly, the pinch in the planter was really to get an area where pedestrians can sit outside of the main circulation flow. And that was really the driver behind that geometry, was to create places where people could relax without feeling as if they're in the way.
So I wanted to quickly remind the audience, if you do have any questions, we have a Q&A tab. Please feel free. I'm going to dedicate some time at the end to audience questions. So next up, this is kind of for everyone, you know, where we're at right now. So a lot of the projects going in, you know, we're kind of at different points of the project, but, you know, maybe starting first with Regina, just a sense of where we're at right now with the project.
Yeah, well, as Kate mentioned, what we've done is we decided to go on several tracks at once. And the first track was taking advantage of some of the development sites that were ongoing in the district and seeing if our ideas could apply. And that quickly gave us, as she mentioned, this opportunity to go talk to the Public Design Commission with DOT and really vet our ideas. And that process last summer at the Tishman site, which was the former full block Macy's above ground parking garage at Livingston between Hoyt and Elm, gave us standing where we realized we could then start to apply some of our ideas for shared streets and increase pedestrian space throughout the district. And this is an incredible opportunity for us. And we fast forwarded through COVID to make 2 other proposals to the city. And that was one, to look very closely at the Dime Savings Bank site that's being redeveloped by JDS. And then also to look at overall guidelines for the entire downtown Brooklyn core. So that's one thing. And then I'm happy to say that there are 2 other fantastic efforts underway. Also, as another specific development site, the Alloy Block on Flatbush between Skimmerhorn and roughly Atlantic and 4th is moving forward, and they will be using, again, these guidelines to take their project to the city. And then also several capital projects that the city is undertaking, most notably at Ashland and Hanson. I'm also happy to say, and I think a lot of this has to do with COVID response on the city's part, is one major idea that has been spawned over the past year is that the city needed to take a harder look at bicycle and pedestrian use on the Brooklyn Bridge. And that idea is something that coincidentally both WXY and BIG had also been looking at with their work with the Strand and with BIG's work with a Van Allen competition. And happily, DOT seized some of those major concepts and provided a new bikeway on the roadway of the Brooklyn Bridge. And implemented that starting just several months ago. And for Brooklynites and for people looking to connect between Manhattan and Brooklyn by bike, everyone knows that the existing pedestrian bikeway on the top center lane was simply so overcrowded that no one was happy. And by providing bike access on the bridge has really added capacity for both pedestrians and cyclists alike. That, for us, though, made us really think hard about Adams Street. And Adams and Joralemon, to me, is the core of downtown Brooklyn. It's the heart. It's where so many of our neighborhoods between Brooklyn Heights and the downtown come together. And what we have also started to advocate for using those ideas is a really renewed Adams Street north from Joralemon Street. And you see here this fantastic image that finally treats Adams Street like a boulevard. Yes, it had been improved over the years when Marriott was built, etc. But now I think we've realized that there's a long-standing capacity to increase pedestrianization and bicycle access along Adams. So I'm so proud of this work as well.
Claire, Kate, anything you wanted to add to where we're at right now?
Well, I think that Regina covered that there's a kind of multi-project approach that's both public, the planned Flatbush Avenue work, Hanson Place, that speed table, coupled with the fact that Adams Street, the improvements to Adams actually have been in the books for a long time, but the opportunity to do Adams and to rethink Adams with all the bikes that are now connecting to a dedicated roadbed bike path in the Brooklyn Bridge, which has been, it's been transformational. Walking across the Brooklyn, it's not just about how great it is to bike across the bridge unimpeded, but how great is it to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge to downtown Brooklyn without worrying about being hit by bikes and with much less sort of noise. So it's really a pleasure. So one can imagine how important Adams Street is. And speaking of the challenges of the climate crisis, including shade, if you walk down Adams today, it's a whole different thing than what you see in this image, which will be essentially a way to walk and bike with a lot more trees, almost a new linear park connecting Brooklyn Bridge. And I think it's really critical to underscore the issue of shading and trees in downtown Brooklyn because of all the subways and the infrastructure. You have a lot of narrow sidewalks and not enough opportunity for trees. And that's why I think the plan really focuses on that.
Yeah, I would just add that we really worked closely with Sam Schwartz as well to figure out where we could reduce lanes. Like this image, for example, we were proposing to reduce the slip lanes on the side of the street to really widen the sidewalks and make them feel more like a boulevard almost. So I think in addition to everything Claire and Regina have said, working that closely with the traffic engineer who was really willing to help us figure out where we could reroute bus routes, where we could widen curbs and reduce traffic lanes was very helpful as well.
And just to add in, the other collaborating partner is Matthews Nielsen, who really took stock of where all of the existing trees were and looked at how to increase the trees in a lot of these areas, and also really kind of looking at when there's a lot of questions about placard parking and stuff and the opportunities but really the opportunity to kind of get rid of all of the blockages of double parking and have many areas that you could plant or people walk in instead was carefully looked at by Sam Schwartz and the whole team, but also by Matthews Nielsen.
Yeah, I saw a question in the chat about placard abuse, which of course is a notorious question. Something that I notice when I visit, every single day in New York City. But I actually wanted the point about the Brooklyn Bridge bike lane is actually a perfect segue to a question I wanted to ask, where, it's the city's ever changing, and the plan is kind of, downtown Brooklyn's really at the precipice of a lot of change right now. You have the bike lane across the Brooklyn Bridge, which anyone seen the news? It's doubled bike traffic in 2 months, which is unbelievable. You have congestion pricing coming quite soon, which will have a huge effect on the area, as we know with bridge shopping that happens around. Flatbush Avenue being a great example of the amount of traffic we're seeing in the city. And then you have the city's kind of bus redesign that's slowly kind of reviving itself. Brooklyn will be the biggest one. And of course, that could have an effect on the Hoyden kind of Livingston, the proposals to have busways. I would love to just hear a bit about how Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, as really a champion of this area, can really push on those fronts. There's a lot of different moving pieces here from the city that I think this plan kind of falls in the crosshairs of.
Well, let me say right off the bat that Downtown Brooklyn Partnership and most, if not all, of the neighboring community groups in Northern Brooklyn have been strong proponents of congestion pricing from the get-go. And that's because we understand how much our neighborhoods are affected by the through traffic across the bridges, and really understand that a change to the way New Yorkers think about the use of the bridges could positively affect our neighborhoods. It's not like the Manhattan Bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge are going away. We certainly understand how vital they are to our transportation network. But any sense of control or diminution use of those facilities would have a positive effect on our neighborhoods. And this is something that I'm so proud that we've been clear about and worked really hard with all of our elected officials and community groups on. The second thing is, as you mentioned earlier and joked, is placard abuse. And this again also is something that affects our neighborhood and affects the way our community is viewed, and how people feel about walking, biking, just simply getting around downtown Brooklyn, is how many cars come to the neighborhood. There are many good reasons that agency personnel are given placards and the ability to come here, especially because of the court system. But the reality is that cars should not be banked up against our highways and banked up against double parked medians, because those issues really result in both safety concerns, congestion, and frankly, are anti-business because no one else feels like they have access. So this is something that we have been strongly in front of, and I hope to also be able to take up with the new mayor and with the new city council members on. So yeah.
That's actually a good, I was actually going to mention we're at the changing of the guard, right? So city council and city hall obviously changing hands to the Adams administration, and a brand new city council coming in. Eric Adams, no stranger to downtown Brooklyn, obviously Borough Hall being in Columbus Park. And now Antonio Reynoso, who is a huge streets advocate, will be the new borough president. I would love to hear about kind of the months ahead, the first 100 days of the new administration, the new city council, just this kind of, perhaps a new DOT kind of commissioner coming in. We'll see with that. Just the kind of future of the plan on the first 100 days and where you see it kind of going from here with the new mayor coming in and the new city council.
Well, for me, I will continue to be downtown Brooklyn's staunchest advocate for new planning in downtown Brooklyn and the environs. And I'm so proud that the work that we've developed with WXY and BIG couldn't be at a better time. I feel we had, what we went through as a city, what we're still going through as a city in terms of the health crisis has pointed to the direction that all of our public spaces need to be upgraded for not just our health, not just our safety, but our well-being. And I think with that as context, I feel very well armed, happily, with the fantastic work that BIG and WXY did, with projects that are beautiful, doable, and provide more safety and more cohesion in the downtown area. And I certainly feel great about the themes that we've touched on in this session. I think all of them will have resonance with the next administration, both at the city and at the borough president level. And I'm really looking forward to that.
Great. I think it's something that, would be really interesting having two quite well-known street space advocates now, being in Borough Hall, but also being in City Hall. Adams promising 300 lanes of protected bike lanes, and also really getting behind the 25 by 25 vision that Transportation Alternatives has put forth. So it'll certainly be an interesting first 100 days in the coming months. I want to get into the questions because there's some great ones from the audience. And it seems like the placard abuse has really hit a nerve, as it always seems to. First question for Kate. So Kate, we got a question from an anonymous attendee. How would a streetscape designer deal with intrusive tree roots? And I know this is a notorious problem. Or has this been taken care of when deciding what species of tree to plant?
Well, a lot of the reason the tree roots grow above the ground is because the soil is so compacted below ground that they start going up to try to get enough air. So roots grow through gaps in the soil. So part of that actually gets compressed over time unless you use something like silvocels or structural soil. So our toolkit for downtown Brooklyn proposes the use of either silvocels or structural soil under the permeable paving to help mitigate this issue. Because there's very few species native to New York that grow that way naturally, unlike, banyan trees, and tropical climates do have these really aggressive roots. Most of our trees don't. So if you just provide the right kind of soil, it can also greatly expand a tree's life. A typical street tree only lives 7 to 10 years, and we're targeting more of like a 50-year growth. So you obviously have a much larger tree that helps mitigate over time temperature increase by providing more shade and reducing the microclimate.
I didn't know that about an average street tree's years being 7 to 10 years. Wow.
Yeah, it's very little because it's a typical hit for DOT or the city is The standard tree pit's 5 feet by 10 feet.
Mhm.
So the cubic soil volume is only like 150 cubic feet. And if you can target more like, 800 to 1,000 cubic feet of soil, you can greatly expand a tree's life up to like 50 to 70 years.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's something that, there was encouraging news this week, how much the tree canopy in New York City has expanded this last decade, which was really encouraging to see. And actually, Kate, as a follow-up, another question that came in during COP, the UN conference right now in Glasgow. There was some research that was raised showing that trees planted close to car lanes can actually trap exhaust fumes and other pollution.
Mhm.
And, thereby worsening rather than improving the quality of air breathed by nearby cyclists and pedestrians. A question from the audience being, was this a counterintuitive dynamic factored into your proposals or projects?
No, it hasn't been. I mean, yes, that can potentially happen, but I think that having the benefit of trees serves the most people in terms of providing, reducing the urban heat island effect in downtown Brooklyn, and also just providing a place that feels more vibrant. Trees often just do that by planting them. Neighborhoods kind of start to feel more vibrant. Just by having more green, and it reduces the stormwater runoff. So while that is somewhat of an issue, it wasn't a driving factor. And also the majority of streets in downtown Brooklyn with bike lanes, it's not Flatbush Avenue. It's not like it's Atlantic Avenue where there really is sort of a standstill of cars with exhaust, just producing a lot of exhaust. Like we were really focusing on a lot of the smaller streets that connect sort of these larger streets that have been sort of overlooked for a very long time.
Yeah, and of course, this was something that congestion pricing will have hopefully a huge effect on, which actual traffic levels and the amount of cars going through downtown Brooklyn, right? The next question actually kind of related to this, Regina. There's talk about removing cars in some of the renderings, but in a lot of the cases they're going to be shared, right, between people, bikes, cars. Is that accurate? And how would you kind of describe the kind of shared aspect of the streets? And Claire as well, you could chime in.
Yeah, of course, from a design perspective, this is really important. But we've had a lot of success already in downtown Brooklyn in reducing vehicular lanes to provide more pedestrian space. DOT, of course, our famous Willoughby Plaza, right at Adams and the Shake Shack as a major point of interest, proved that almost over a decade ago. And so we built our advocacy on those successes, starting at both Willoughby Street and then also in the areas between Fulton and Livingston and Fulton and Willoughby, with the idea that each of those streets has, frankly, substandard sidewalks, some of them as narrow as 8 feet. And the shared street gives pedestrians more use of the streets, and it's a very basic concept in that way. What our planning work, which is really, we had the luxury of being able to do this block by block, really focused on expanding the pedestrian experience in each street. And this goes hand in hand with a couple of other concepts. One is that there's too much parking downtown, and that we could easily promote some of these spaces for pedestrians as opposed to vehicles, and that the traffic is not quick, right? So in each of these places, the vehicular lanes are permitted to continue. We're not proposing that cars be prohibited, but they should be really slowed down and made to be so the streets are frankly more safer. And I think that, this is something that we will continue to advocate throughout the pedestrian core.
And it's something I know related. Obviously, we heard some news this week that, there could be money in the big infrastructure package that was obviously just signed into law yesterday for addressing the Brooklyn Queens Expressway and possible some revenues there, which I know obviously has an effect on the area as part of the kind of crucial infrastructure there.
Well, John, let's work on that together.
Yeah. the question that is hard to have an answer for, the BQE. All right, so two more questions I wanted to just get out. These are great ones. One attendee mentioned, are there any plans discussed for Skimmerhorn Street? Because it's a major artery, which seems to be a big artery connecting the Brooklyn Bridge and 4th Avenue. The attendee said they're aware of a DOT survey that was open recently, but is that going to be incorporated into the scope of what you're discussing? Skimmerhorn Street.
Yeah, I think, Skimmerhorn Street is a place where we're going to have to really work carefully with city agencies and with New York City Transit. Because one of the things that really impacts Skimmerhorn Street currently are the large amount of official vehicles parked along the Hoyt-Skimmerhorn subway station, which prevents through bikeway traffic east-west, which we all know, which we know basically from experience, is there's a huge demand for. There's a huge demand for east-west bicycling that is not met. So that's number one. And then the number two is looking hard at our bus network, which is so vestigial to the old days of the trolley. And this is, I think you mentioned this, John, in your introduction. This is going to be a long process, but we're really excited to be working with all of our partners in the neighborhoods, as well as our elected officials, to work with New York City Transit to come up with a bus network that's so vital to our neighborhood, but yet is upgraded to current conditions. So yes, on Skirmahorn.
Yeah, and of course, it's a bus network that reflects quite old travel patterns, right? It has been redesigned in decades, which is, the kind of great endeavor the MTA is now undertaking.
I mean, I'm not sure if we have the plans in the slide link, but basically the concept is that you really you create a complete street on both Livingston and Skemmerhorn, but your Fulton Street also becomes part of this bus loop, which then allows the bikeways to function, both in terms of north, in terms of that connection across downtown. Right now, if you're in Skirmahorn, number one, that bus lane is blocked so many times that it's hard to get across. And you start seeing the fact that there's a huge need for bikes to get through and people to walk, but it's really impeded. And so I think the thing that the idea is to untease some of these systems and really support separated bike lanes, which is really right now not there.
So part of the proposal of having the westbound bike lane on Fulton as a dedicated bike lane was to have the eastbound bike lane on Schwimmerhorn as a one-way dedicated bike lane. And in both instances, you can do a protected bike lane so that bikers feel even more safe. And DOT has recently improved the connection from Schwimmerhorn from 3rd Ave across to Lafayette, and it's greatly improved. So if we could do the rest of the street, it would be incredible.
One last question that came up, and this is an interesting one. This is something that I think a lot of districts are facing right now. Are there any plans to activate the nightlife in downtown Brooklyn? Does the plan address public safety? The streets are dark at night and less active. Is there a way to really bring a night kind of focused economy to downtown Brooklyn? It's a great question.
Yeah, I think that the night economy in downtown Brooklyn has really been improved as our neighborhood has become more mixed use. We have really successful movie theaters at Alamo, and now with Gage and Tollner and a few new restaurants on Rockwell Place and other areas, we're starting to see more and more people hang out in downtown Brooklyn in the evening. So we welcome additional restaurants, bars, entertainment in the downtown area, and would really look forward to supporting those in any way.
What I wanted to add is that downtown Brooklyn goes from Barclays, the Atlantic Gateway, and the Brooklyn Cultural District all the way to Tillery and across. And part of what the plan tries to do is kind of make it easy to walk and take buses and bike through that whole area. Right now, it feels like Fulton feels like a barrier, Flatbush feels like a barrier, and a lot of the focus, both with the Flatbush Avenue extension project, but also what could happen on Fulton Mall, what's already happening, developer by developer, is that it's not very far. So the nightlife that's happening, at BAM, at Barclays, and on Atlantic Avenue, and then back up in downtown Brooklyn in all sorts of restaurants, should start to feel like it's accessible to people, and it's a great place to walk at night. I think I'm most excited by a lot of the laneway potential to be the kinds of places in the evenings after work that people innovate. There's some new food that comes up. There's music. I think the music scene historically, even on the street in downtown Brooklyn, even in some of the stuff at Metrotech, has been an amazing opportunity to enjoy the city.
I think that's a great message actually to conclude on. You build it for people and people will come, and at all different hours. So it's interesting to see. I've been spent some late nights at the Alamo Draft House. It's a great theater. I think it's something that, just kind of in conclusion, this has been a great panel because I think we've hit a lot of different issues. And also, we got off to a bit of a kind of later start, but some great discussions here. And I think with what we're seeing right now, obviously with the kind of pandemic era changes to our streets, open restaurants just approved yesterday by the City Planning Commission, open streets now made permanent. Obviously, we have all these new plans coming out. It'll be really interesting to see, really watch the space, because I think there's going to be, the bike boom not stopping, the pandemic era bike boom. So really watch the space. I think, it'll be really interesting next year of how the city tries to incorporate some of these new changes. If you have any last remarks, anyone, Regina, feel free.
No, I'm grateful for the time, and thanks to everyone at NYC by Design for hosting this great week in New York City, focusing on design, and looking forward to January 1. And of course, hopefully next November, we'll have some really great things to talk about.
Great. Thank you, Claire and Kate, so much.
Yeah. And thank you, John.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks,
everyone. Thanks to the participants. Great questions. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks so much.